everybody, I'm David Asman. Thank you for joining us. Kicking off tonight, are you better off now than you were 2 years ago? Well, according to most polls, most folks don't believe they are. But the president and his advisors say you should feel better off, that things really are better than they were.
Virtually any measure, our economy is in a better place than it was 2 years ago.
And for those who complain about taxes, well, the president slaps down that complaint, saying we should be grateful for his tax cuts.
In fact, 1/3 of the Recovery Act was made up of tax cuts. Tax cuts that have already provided more than $160 billion in relief for families and businesses.
So why is it that while the president says we're paying less in taxes, a New York Times news poll says that fewer than 1 in 10 people even knew that the Obama administration had lowered taxes? The thing is, folks are looking around and seeing a lot of government spending, trillions of dollars of spending. And they figure that somehow, someday, somebody has to pay for all that, and that's got to mean higher taxes. That's why consumers are spending less and why businesses are borrowing less. Folks are socking away what they have, thinking that eventually things are going to get worse. And the fact is that state and local taxes have been going up, way up, leading to smaller paychecks. We're also getting nickel and dime to death by all kinds of hidden taxes, like all those extra taxes tacked onto your phone bill. Have you looked at those recently? And then there are the costs of things that we go out and buy at the stores. We're being told there's no inflation, but things are costing more. Folks feel poorer. And there are figures that back up those feelings. Anyone who's been to a grocery store knows that food prices rose 1.4%. And putting gas in the car has increased nearly 4%. And those are the things that matter to us. That's what we can't avoid, what we have to pay for. Now, to all these complaints, the president's supporters counsel patience. 2 years is not a long time to come out of a really rotten recession, they say. They remind us that it took Ronald Reagan 2 years to get out of the recession that he inherited, and that's true enough. But there's a key difference. The difference between that time and now is expectations. Expectations are what all markets are really built on, after all, and going into 1983, expectations were high because we knew that the Reagan tax cuts were about to kick in. And along with lower tax rates, there were fewer regulations, which also lowered the cost of doing business. Now, we face exactly the opposite scenario. Right now, tax rates are probably going to be going up, and regulations we've seen are already multiplying like rats. So is it any wonder that folks are feeling the pinch? Well, not to us. And we suspect not to our next guest, Congressman Ron Paul, who joins us now. Congressman, wonderful to see you. Sorry you had to wait while I was ranting along that way, but kind of makes me upset the fact that he thinks the president and his supporters are calling us ungrateful for not being grateful enough to his tax cuts.
Well, if he wants us to be grateful, he ought to just leave us alone. Let us work hard and keep what we earn. Now, then I would be grateful. But this idea that the people have to be grateful to government means that the government, owns us. The other thing that bothers me is that, you can't cut taxes on a person because it'll be a cost to government. You've heard that. How can that? The assumption is that the government owns everything we earn. And if you cut some taxes, then it costs government. It should be the other way around. Everybody that earns something is there. And the government is coming to take something.
Exactly. I mean, absolutely. Everything that the government has comes from us, the private sector. I mean, maybe they can sell a little land here and there, but bottom line is that we're not taking from them. They're not giving us tax breaks. They're taking everything they have from us, even if they're borrowing money that they don't have, right?
Yeah, and, they like to fall back and say, well, we'll just raise the corporate taxes, tax businesses, and they're making all the money. But look, how long did it take the insurance company pass on their anticipated increase in costs with this medical bill? They've already raised their rates. So that was regulations and taxes. And like you mentioned in your opening statement, these are all costs and they get passed on. So in a technical fashion, there is no such thing as a corporate tax or a business tax. It's all people's taxes. They have to pay for it, or these companies can't provide the goods and services that we want. So that's why I think it's so nice to defend the marketplace and the free market and say, you know, no taxes were best, or very, very little taxes, and people would be more prosperous. You know, people, why they're feeling so poor is that the real standard of living has been going down for 10 years. Real wages, and there hasn't been good jobs. I dated from the year 2000. I think we've been slipping, losing the jobs, and people know it. The cost of living is going up, and unfortunately, you're exactly right. The anticipation that this is going to go away in a year or two. I've talked to some people today down in my district, and they say, how am I going to raise my kids? And they're looking to the future, and they really feel despondent. And we live in a pretty good area. Texas is not as hard hit as some others, but there's still a lot of people here very worried about the future.
Well,
so
and expectations. I mean, markets.
Well.
You know, markets are all about expectations. That's what makes stocks go up or down. The expectation of whether it'll do well or not. Our expectations now are that somehow, some way, we got to pay for all this spending, and that usually means, doesn't mean that they're going to cut something else, that they're going to keep everything the same and charge us more in taxes. But let's drill down a little bit more in the regulation idea, because already we've seen in the health care bill this 1099 provision that forces all businesses to account for every single expense above $600. That means a whole new slew of bookkeeping that small businesses can't afford. The financial regulation bill creates hundreds of new regulations. It has at least 8 new agencies themselves, each one of which will probably hire hundreds, if not thousands, of bureaucrats and create regulations. And then the existing agencies that we have, regulations from things like OSHA are multiplying. We're hearing horror stories from small businesses, mom and pop stores, saying that OSHA inspectors are coming in and drilling in like they never have before. These all cost money, and the cost of doing business is skyrocketing.
Yeah, and I don't have any trouble condemning that, because it's obvious there's a cost and we shouldn't be doing it. But really what bothers me is philosophically they shouldn't be writing these. You know, the Constitution is pretty clear about only Congress writes the laws, but we create these creatures and then we just turn them loose. And they write regulations, and they are the law. They are the force of law. But I don't think the founders ever intended to have these thousands and thousands of pages in the Federal Register, which are the law. And nobody can read them or understand it. You know, who can really understand the tax code, let alone all these EPA regulations? And then they say, I wonder why our companies want to go overseas. Yeah, you know, right. And we're just chasing them away. It's such a tragedy under these circumstances.
Well, and then there is another creature that our founders never envisioned, and that is the Federal Reserve Board, an institution which you love to opine on. They claim, or at least a lot of them, because there is some pushback now from some members of the board, people like Richard Fisher in Dallas and so forth, but they claim that we have no inflation, and that therefore we can take a little more inflation, and therefore we can buy some of this government debt that has been run up by the government to the tune of an extra $100 billion a month. That's what some of these officials are saying. When are we going to feel, have we already begun to feel the effects of this? Because I think we have when we go out shopping.
Oh, yeah, I think so. People know that prices are going up. But, you know, that emphasizes the difference between the definition of a Keynesian definition of inflation versus an Austrian. Keynesians say when the prices rise, but prices going up is a consequence of inflation. Inflation is when you increase the money supply. Right. So we have had inflation. When Greenspan had interest rate at 1%, he did that through inflating the money supply. And just think of what Bernanke has done since then, doubled the money supply. There again, he spent $2 trillion bailing out his buddies. That's an authorization and appropriation, and it's off the books, and we can't even find out what they did. So that it is so out of control. The one thing, though, I think we all should be grateful for is more and more people now understand that the Federal Reserve is very, very important in the problems that we have. It used to be seen that, oh, the Fed creates good times and takes care of us when we have bad times. But I think those are days that have gone and passed now, because I think people now realize the Fed is responsible for so many of our problems.
I think they do get it, and that is what makes me very optimistic about the future, and particularly what's coming in the next election. Stay with us if you can, Congressman. Want to bring in our panel as well, Fox News contributor Andrea Tenteros and Steve Malanga, senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. And Steve, one thing we haven't talked about is the fact that the president's tax cuts don't make our tax code smaller. They make it bigger, because along with these tax cuts are all these provisions. In order to get this tax cut, you have to do this and you have to do that. And you have to be more green, or you have to be more this. They're real attempts at social engineering.
Right, that's exactly the point. You know, the president is saying, well, why don't people acknowledge my tax cuts? Well, the tax cuts are not in the form of, gee, let's cut your tax rate. Instead, they are the form of, let's achieve social ends, making work pay, earned income tax credit, education
Putting
credits.
up windmills in your backyard.
Right. It's all about credits. First of all, not everybody takes them because it's very complex. They don't understand. Secondly, it's like when you cut people's tax rates, when they walk into the office and get their next paycheck, there's more in their paycheck. That's not what's happened when you have all of this social engineering. It's the way Democrats, and also a lot of Republicans, unfortunately, think that they want to cut taxes these days.
Well, Andrea, despite all the rhetoric that Tea Partiers are racist, that Tea Partiers are dumb, that Tea Partiers don't get it, they do get it. And people, for example, like Joe Miller in Alaska, who, by the way, went to West Point, and by the way, went to Yale, and by the way, is a very smart economist like Dr. Paul is, they do get it. They're beginning to understand, and it is going to translate, I think, in the next election, isn't it?
Absolutely, but if you look at what the administration's saying, they're assuming that we don't get it. They're assuming we don't understand at all. And the only time they've conceded any liability...
But isn't that assumption dumb?
It's very dumb. The only liability they've conceded...
just wake up and smell the coffee, you know?
The only liability they've conceded, David, is that they have a communications problem, that they didn't communicate, that we're too dumb to get it. They'll probably say we're too dumb to get the facts that they actually passed these tax cuts in the stimulus. The problem is they passed these complicated tax cuts, like Stephen said, with a carrot, an organic carrot, that made it tougher for businesses to get them to do business. They pass them with massive spending that's going to drive up taxes. No wonder there's uncertainty. Business don't know. They don't know which ends is up.
You know, Dr. Paul, I was hearing the same kind of talk back in 1979 against the Reaganites, saying, "Oh, these people are so naive about their understanding of government," saying that government is the problem, not the solution. I mean, that kind of rhetoric won't get any. First of all, it won't get Ronald Reagan elected. Secondly, if he is elected, he's a one-termer because his policies are going to fall apart. We've heard this rhetoric before, haven't we?
Oh, absolutely. And they always assumed if Reagan had been nominated or would be nominated, he'd be an easy target. But talking about them assuming that the people are dumb, I was sitting on the House floor once. We passed a bill which we shouldn't have passed, and I looked over to another member. And I said, "Why'd you vote for that? You're just, telling people what to do with their lives." He says, "They're too dumb." He says, "We have to tell them that." And this came from a congressman, and I was just dumbfounded because it's so opposite of everything I believe. But there must be a lot of them in Congress that actually believe that, whether it's your social life or whether it's your economic life. People they assume are too dumb, and therefore they need these wonderful people, the bureaucrats, and these good politicians that know how to tell you how to spend your money.
Well, guess what? They keep thinking like that, and they're not going to be long for their current positions. Congressman Ron Paul, great to see you again. And Steve and Andrea, we'll see you later. We have a snazzy new website, by the way, that we'd love for you to check out. Let us know if you